Right now, they're building a massive ocean port on one of the Caribbean islands. The scale's enormous. Vast container yards, cranes for loading and unloading cargo. They're even planning to carve out part of the island to make room for the port. But here's the catch. There's basically nothing on this island. Nothing at all. It's 108 square miles of Caribbean land, palm trees, sand, and not a single factory or valuable mineral resource. Just a barren patch of land in the middle of the Caribbean Sea. There's hardly any cargo coming in, and really, who would it be for? Nothing gets exported from this island either. And yet, this is exactly where they're building a megaport. At first glance, it seems like a very strange choice of location. Until you start looking into the details. What looks like a ridiculous idea at first turns out to be a very smart, carefully calculated move. So, who needs this port, and how are they actually planning to make it work? Let's find out. This island is called Mayaguana, the most remote, forgotten corner of the Bahamas. Forget five-star resorts, sparkling pools, and tourists. Life here is as far from the glossy postcards as you can get. The entire island is home to barely 270 people scattered across 3 half-empty villages. Young people leave at the first chance they get. Everyone who stays knows each other by face, and most are neighbors or relatives. Infrastructure stuck in the last century. There isn't a single bank branch or ATM on the island. The local economy runs entirely on cash. If you run out, forget about paying by card or transferring money at a local shop. The power grid's a constant disaster. Aging diesel generators break down all the time, leaving homes in complete darkness for days. When that happens, the desalination pumps go offline. People can go weeks without running water, relying on wells instead. The roads are falling apart, and there's no smooth asphalt in sight. The island's only supply lifeline is a mail ship that arrives once a week with groceries and diesel. When storms hit, the ship can be delayed, and suddenly the island runs out of everything, from gas at the lone fuel station to fresh bread. Medical services here are basically non-existent. There's no proper hospital here, just a small clinic staffed by a single nurse on duty. Anyone seriously ill or injured has only one option, an emergency airlift to the capital. And if you're already thinking, why would anyone build anything here, let alone a megaport? There's one more thing you should know. This place has a track record of killing mega projects. Let's rewind a bit. Back in 2006, the government already tried to rescue this island. They signed a massive deal with a major American investment group known as I Group, based in Boston. The figure involved was simply staggering, $1.8 billion. Just think about that. An insane amount for an island with a population of only around 300 people. The plan sounded incredible. The investors were set to buy and develop nearly 14% of the island's land, about 15.5 square miles. Their vision was to turn Mayaguana into a mega resort paradise, a second Maldives. People were promised luxury hotels, thousands of jobs, modern roads, and full-scale infrastructure. But what actually happened? Nothing. The project got bogged down in bureaucracy. Years went by, papers shuffled from one glossy folder to another, and the island itself remained completely unchanged. The investors didn't even deliver the basic infrastructure they had promised. The pinnacle of this failure came on the night of April 4th, 2013. A local man needed an urgent medical evacuation to Nassau. A twin-engine medical plane was dispatched, but there was one huge, fatal problem. The island's airstrip still had no proper lighting because the investors never provided it. To give the pilot any chance of landing in the dark, locals had to drive their pickup trucks onto the runway and illuminate it with headlights. Around 1 a.m., the pilot began his descent. In the darkness, he drifted slightly and one wing clipped a truck. The plane immediately lost control. The right landing gear snapped off and it smashed into a second pickup at full speed. There was a massive explosion as the aviation fuel ignited and 3 people in the vehicle were killed. After an accident like that, it seemed like no project should ever have been allowed on this island. And yet, here we are. They're putting thousands of containers in a location without banks, ATMs, hospitals, or any kind of infrastructure. And huge amounts of money are being invested there. This new project begins with a massive full-scale overhaul of the island's basic utility infrastructure. That means crews will upgrade the power supply, build modern water treatment and desalination systems, and put up basic housing for the entire construction team. Without that, there's simply no way to bring in a huge workforce. There would be nowhere for them to sleep, no reliable drinking water, and no power to keep their equipment running. And most importantly, this time they've started with real, tangible progress. The first major breakthrough was the recent completion of a brand new, fully secure terminal at the local airport. In March 2026, it was officially opened by the Prime Minister of the Bahamas himself. The airport now has its own dedicated transformer, proper professional lighting, and comfortable passenger areas. In other words, they've done everything necessary to make sure the nightmare of 2013 never happens again. For the island, that alone would already be a genuine lifeline, a mega project in its own right. Yet it's only the tiniest glimpse of what's in store. The plan calls for massive terminals, huge concrete storage yards for bulk cargo, and deep water berths capable of handling the largest ocean-going vessels. But building a port out in the open ocean is an incredibly tough challenge. First, you can't even start major construction without bringing in heavy machinery, excavators, cranes, bulldozers. They can't be shipped in on an old mail boat. That's why construction begins with a temporary marine offloading facility. Essentially, that's a port to build the port. This temporary dock exists solely to unload an armada of construction equipment and thousands of tons of concrete. The most astonishing aspect, however, is the engineering behind the main terminal. Typically, ports on exposed coastlines require massive, outrageously expensive breakwaters far out at sea to shield docked ships from powerful waves. At Mayaguana, the engineers chose a radically different and far bolder approach. Instead of building an artificial breakwater out at sea, they plan to carve a protected inner harbor right into the island itself. Yes, you heard right. Giant dredgers and excavators will literally bite into Mayaguana's limestone shield, digging out millions of cubic feet of solid rock to create an artificial bay on dry land. Why go to such lengths? The Caribbean is notorious for its hurricane season. A ship moored at an exposed pier during a storm would be smashed to pieces against concrete walls. But a harbor nestled inside the island, surrounded on all sides by rock and solid earth, offers perfect hurricane-proof shelter. The backbone of the entire project will be a massive container terminal, complete with deep water berths and vast cargo storage yards. The man-made harbors being designed to handle heavy post-Panamax ocean container ships. To make that possible, engineers will have to dredge the seabed to a depth of roughly 43 to 49 feet, deep enough for these steel giants to reach the shore. To give you a sense of the scale, a ship like that can be more than 980 feet long, longer than 3 football fields placed end to end, and it can carry 10,000 to 15,000 heavy containers at once. Now put those facts side by side. A gigantic steel monster, packed to the brim with thousands of massive metal boxes, is supposed to dock at an island where only 270 people live. Sounds like complete nonsense. Containers headed to nowhere. But the truth is, it's all part of a carefully planned strategy. The real reason behind the construction of this massive port has nothing to do with what's produced or consumed on the island itself. The secret, simple: location. Mayaguana is a jackpot on the global logistics map. Shipping routes can run from ports on the U.S. East Coast or from Europe's largest trade hubs straight to the entrance of the Panama Canal. Some of these routes pass right along the shores of Mayaguana. This tiny patch of land sits at the intersection of heavily trafficked, high-value transatlantic shipping lanes. Every day, colossal fleets of cargo ships laden with electronics, clothing, cars, parts, and goods worth hundreds of billions of dollars sail past these deserted shores. They're headed from Europe and North America to the Panama Canal, on to ports in Latin America, the U.S. West Coast, or further to Asia. Do you see the brilliance of this plan? The island doesn't need to produce a thing. It doesn't need factories, coal mines, smartphone assembly plants, or millions of residents. Mayaguana is set to become a powerful hub for container transshipment. What does that mean in simple terms? Modern global logistics is obsessed with scale. Ultra-large vessels like Neo-Panamax ships are now capable of carrying 14,000 to 15,000 containers in a single voyage. It's completely impractical, both economically and physically, for these massive ships to call at the many small ports in the Caribbean and Central America. Why not? Because smaller ports simply don't have the depth needed to keep a giant ship from running aground or the towering cranes required to unload containers from the top deck. Time translates to money for these vessels. If a mega container ship had to stop at every small port to drop off 100 containers at a time, it'd go bankrupt from the fuel costs and endless port fees. So the smart people came up with a system of transit hubs. It works almost exactly like connections at major passenger airports. When you fly from a small town in Europe to a small city in Asia, you usually don't take a direct flight. You fly into a massive hub. Dubai, Doha, Istanbul, and then catch another flight to your final destination. The logic here is exactly the same. Huge transoceanic vessels will enter the carved-out harbor of Mayaguana. It'll become their maritime Dubai. Within just a couple of days, they'll unload thousands of containers, turn around, and head back to Europe or continue on toward the Panama Canal. The containers, meanwhile, will be neatly stacked across those enormous concrete yards built inside the island. So what happens next? That's where feeder vessels come in. These are smaller, more agile cargo ships, basically maritime couriers. They dock at Mayaguana, pick up the right batches of containers, and then deliver them in smaller loads to final destinations across the region: the Dominican Republic, Jamaica, the smaller islands of the Bahamas, or ports in Mexico. And this perfect machine works both ways. Small feeder ships collect export goods, agricultural products, for example, from across the Caribbean, bring them to Mayaguana, and pile them up into one massive pile of containers. Then a single ocean-faring giant arrives, picks everything up at once, and carries it off to Europe. That's why this port's designed to operate 24/7. It's not being built to serve 300 local people. It's supposed to become a major piece of global trade infrastructure. On paper, it sounds like the perfect plan, right? But let's be realistic. The Caribbean logistics pie has already been divided up for a long time, and nobody's going to give up their slice without a fight. Mayaguana isn't exactly operating in a vacuum. The Caribbean already has powerful, long-established players in the game. The most obvious examples are Freeport in the northern Bahamas and the massive port of Kingston in Jamaica. For decades, millions of containers have moved through these ports. They have a reputation, connections, and well-established shipping routes. But Mayaguana has one major trump card, one that could outweigh all the advantages of its older competitors. The port's being built completely from scratch, and it's being designed from day one for the harsh realities of the modern era of megaships. So what's the big deal? Older ports like Kingston constantly have to find workarounds. They need to widen narrow channels, rebuild cramped docks that were designed back in the last century, and somehow squeeze enormous cranes onto aging piers. That's insanely expensive, painfully slow, and in many cases, technically impossible. Mayaguana doesn't start with any of those headaches. The designers don't have to work around outdated infrastructure. They build a straight channel to deep water from the get-go and outfit the port with top-of-the-line automated equipment. The whole facility is designed to handle ships effortlessly without unnecessary maneuvering. That technological edge is what could potentially make Mayaguana one of the fastest transshipment hubs in the entire region, and in maritime logistics, as we know, every hour saved is pure profit. But the mega project on the island doesn't actually stop at trade. The container business is, without a doubt, a reliable source of serious revenue. But the investors decided to add one more element to the project, one that could turn this forgotten island into a true gold mine, not only for serious logistics players, but also for spoiled tourists. In addition to the cargo zone, the project includes Phase 2, the construction of a full-scale, modern terminal for massive cruise ships. This is Mayaguana's real secret weapon, so why would cruise ships be needed here? Let's look at what's happening in the leisure industry. The Caribbean cruise market's bursting at the seams. The main ports in the northern Bahamas, such as Nassau and Freeport, are already packed to capacity. Giant cruise liners have to wait in line just to dock, while tourists constantly complain that the most popular ports are overcrowded, chaotic, clogged with traffic, and no longer feel like the exclusive laid-back tropical escape they came for. Cruise corporations are desperately searching for new, unexplored routes that can impress their loyal repeat customers, and Mayaguana can offer them exactly that, a completely new, isolated destination. For the first time in history, this project could open up the entire southeastern part of the Bahamian archipelago to global tourism. Just imagine it. Tourists tired of Nassau's overcrowded beaches arrive on Mayaguana instead. Here they find untouched empty shores dotted with crabs, rare species of rock iguanas, crystal clear waters perfect for snorkeling, and a rich local history waiting to be explored. For local people, this means the arrival of a completely new and almost limitless market, selling souvenirs, offering tours, renting out boats, opening small restaurants serving authentic local food. All of this could grow at incredible speed. Tourists would be bringing dollars straight into the pockets of the islanders. On top of that, it's the perfect way to diversify risk. If global trade hits a crisis and container traffic slows down, the island's economy can still be kept afloat by wealthy tourists sipping cocktails. But you know what? Building all this infrastructure isn't like putting together a backyard shed. It takes extraordinary expertise and massive amounts of money. So to bring such an ambitious plan to life, the Bahamian government decided not to rely on some random contractors. Instead, it joined forces with a powerful international consortium. This is a high-stakes deal with major players at the table. First, there is Global Lead Consultant Group Limited, an international consulting and development firm responsible for the design, calculations, and overall management of the concept. For the heavy infrastructure work, the main construction partner named in the project is 77 Construction UK, a British company with experience in large-scale construction. But the most important part of this story is how the project is being managed legally to avoid repeating the disastrous mistakes of the past. Many still remember the bureaucratic nightmare of the 2006 deal with the Boston-based I Group. To avoid these same traps this time, a special, narrowly focused management structure was created, Mayaguana Port Group. Its only goal is to get the port up and running. Moreover, the project is based on a shared ownership model. In other words, this isn't a story about evil foreign capitalists swooping in and buying an island for pennies on the dollar. Stakes in the mega project are held by the Bahamian government, private investors, and the specially created Mayaguana Island Development Fund. That fund's meant to guarantee that part of the revenue generated by the cranes and terminals goes directly back into the local community, funding schools, building proper roads, and purchasing medical supplies. The money isn't supposed to simply vanish overseas, it's supposed to stay on the island and work for the people who live there. Official early projections from the Bahamian government suggest that finishing all 3 phases and then operating the port and cruise terminal for years to come will generate about 2,000 full-time jobs. And this is where we need to pause for a second and really take in the scale of that number: 2,000 jobs on an island where fewer than 300 people live today, including infants and the very elderly. It sounds almost impossible. For Mayaguana, this would mean a full-blown demographic and economic explosion. The island's population could grow tenfold, maybe even 15-fold in just a few years. The project would need a massive, constant inflow of skilled workers, engineers, heavy crane operators, logistics specialists, managers, dock workers, and later, service staff for the cruise terminal. People would start flocking here from other Bahamian islands. Some would return from the capital, while others would come from abroad, and that, in turn, would require the construction of entire new residential neighborhoods. These thousands of workers would need places to buy food, which means new supermarkets would open. They would need gas stations, pharmacies, and daycare centers for their children. An island that had been asleep for decades, slowly fading away, would come to life with remarkable vigor. Mayaguana's economy would be transformed forever, turning from a quiet, forgotten fishing village into a busy, prosperous international hub. And that naturally raises the next question: how do the locals feel about all this? Nowadays, we often see the same thing. Whenever there's a big construction project, local environmentalists and residents storm the streets with angry signs, chain themselves to trees, and fiercely protest against greedy developers. But in this case, everything's the exact opposite. Contrary to every entrenched stereotype, Mayaguana locals aren't protesting the development, quite the opposite. At official public meetings held in Abraham's Bay, community members practically begged the investors to stay and build as quickly as possible. Why would they want that? Because for them, this massive megaport isn't destroying nature, it's literally a matter of survival. For the first time in history, they might get a modern hospital so they won't have to charter a plane for every broken bone. It's an opportunity to build proper schools for their children. Most importantly, it's the only realistic way to stop the mass exodus of young people. Right now, any teenager who graduates high school on Mayaguana buys a ferry ticket and heads to Nassau. Because back home, there's just nothing to do and no way to make even a cent. The port will offer prestigious jobs, good salaries, and a compelling reason to stay on their native island for good. But as wonderful as it all sounds, there are some important caveats. You can't excavate millions of cubic feet of earth, reshape a coastline, and somehow leave a fragile natural environment untouched. That's the dark flip side of this project, and it's not something you can simply gloss over. Mayaguana is surrounded by some of the most pristine coral reefs in the entire Caribbean. The water here is astonishingly clear, home to rare species of tropical fish and an extremely complex ecosystem that's taken thousands of years to form. The problem is that dredging, aggressively digging deep water channels to let huge vessels in and creating that inner harbor, will inevitably churn up thousands of tons of caustic silt, sand, and dust from the seabed. That thick, murky cloud can be carried by underwater currents for miles beyond the construction zone, and if that sediment settles over the coral reefs in a dense layer, it can simply smother them. Corals need clean sunlight to survive. In cloudy, polluted water, they bleach and die very quickly, turning into a dead limestone graveyard. The developers, of course, are well aware of this enormous reputational and environmental risk. They have officially pledged to carry out all earthworks in strict accordance with the tough environmental standards of the International Finance Corporation. In practice, that means they plan to use special underwater barriers and screens known as silk curtains to physically prevent the dirty sediment from spreading through the surrounding waters. They also promise daily monitoring of water quality and visibility. But we all know how it works. On paper, everything always looks smooth. The balance between heavy, messy industry and the incredibly delicate ecology of the Bahamas remains the biggest source of concern for some local people and environmentalists around the world. Still, the real consequences will only become clear once the project is actually built. By the way, when's that supposed to happen? At this point, all the key legal documents have already been signed. This is no longer just investors dreaming big, it's now a documented legal reality. The project is currently in a pivotal stage involving an extremely demanding environmental impact evaluation and painstakingly detailed engineering planning. Specialists are already working on the island, drilling test boreholes, studying ocean currents, testing the strength of the rock, and calculating the budget down to the last dollar. Large-scale physical earthworks and rock blasting have not yet begun, as the consortium is still waiting for final approval from Bahamian environmental authorities. But a temporary dock's already being actively prepared, the bureaucratic and financial machinery is now running at full power, and judging by the Bahamian government's extraordinary determination, there may be no turning back. And that is very good news, because if this wildly ambitious project is carried through to its logical conclusion, it won't just save one small island from slowly fading away, it could reshape the logistics and tourism map of the entire Caribbean region.